A black woman in full military uniform ends up in handcuffs, and not even her ID could stop it. What happens next makes headlines, but before we dive into this unforgettable story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. Brenda Ford could feel the sweat clinging to the back of her neck, not from the Georgia sun, but from the weight of the Kevlar and patches she wore with pride. Her camouflage uniform had always brought a certain silence to a room, sometimes respect, sometimes unease. Today, it was just supposed to be a pit stop. She had driven 6 hours straight after wrapping up a weekend drill at Fort Morris. Tired, but proud. A woman with her life in order, her future mapped out. Gas tank blinking, she pulled into the first station she saw on the outskirts of Hadleyville. A quiet town that always felt too still, like it was holding its breath. Brenda stepped out of her gray pickup, her boots hitting the ground with a solid thump. Her head was shaved close, her posture upright even when no one was looking. The badge on her chest was stitched, not pinned, but it told a story louder than most people cared to hear. She walked inside with the same measured confidence that carried her through deployments in Kuwait and Syria. Civilian life was messier, more subtle in its wars. She grabbed a bottle of water, a protein bar, and headed to the counter. There was a white cashier behind the glass, young, wiry, nervous in that way people get when they've watched too much local news. His eyes flicked from her face to her uniform, then back again. "You in the real army?" he asked, trying to sound casual, like this wasn't his 10th time asking it this week. Brenda gave a nod and placed her items on the counter. "U.S. Army Reserve, out of Fort Morris." He scanned the items but kept staring. "You got any ID?" She raised an eyebrow. "You need ID for bottled water?" "I meant for the uniform. We've had people come in here trying to get discounts, faking it." Brenda didn't flinch. She calmly pulled out her military ID and placed it down on the counter beside her driver's license. "I'm not asking for a discount. I'm asking for a receipt." The kid looked at the cards, then squinted harder. There was a pause. One of those dangerous ones. The kind that doesn't feel like uncertainty, but judgment. Without another word, he stepped back and picked up the phone. Brenda blinked. "You calling the cops?" He hesitated, then shrugged, like it wasn't his decision anymore. "Just doing my job." Brenda stood still, heart rate steady. This wasn't new, not exactly. She had run drills for worse situations. But that didn't make it right. That didn't make it easy. The door chimed behind her. Someone else entering the store. She didn't turn to look. She didn't move. She knew how this would go. Maybe not how it would end, but how it would begin. 10 minutes later, a squad car pulled up outside. Then another. Brenda watched them arrive from behind the glass of the station. A white officer stepped out first. Stocky, with mirrored sunglasses and a shaved head. His partner, younger, hung back. They talked briefly with the cashier, heads turned toward her. Pointed. The first officer entered, hand near his holster. He glanced Brenda up and down like she was a puzzle, missing the piece he needed to believe. "Ma'am," he said, voice neutral but tight, "we've received a call about someone impersonating military personnel." Brenda slowly turned to face them, already holding out her ID. "I'm Sergeant Brenda Ford, U.S. Army Reserve. Here's my CAC card and my driver's license." He took the cards and looked at them, lips tight. "Step outside, please." Brenda didn't move. "I'm showing you proper identification. You need to step outside, now." She looked him in the eye. "Is this an arrest or a detainment?" The younger cop stepped forward now, eyes less confident. "Ma'am, we just need to verify a few things." "Feel me in handcuffs?" He flinched slightly at that. The older cop, losing patience, motioned toward her. "Turn around, hands behind your back." Brenda clenched her jaw. She could hear her heartbeat now. She looked at the civilian in the corner with a phone halfway raised, A recording had already begun. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," the officer muttered. She slowly turned, calm, dignified. This wasn't the battlefield she trained for, but it was the one she lived on. The metal touched her wrists. Cold. Tight. The air was heavy with silence and disbelief as she was led outside. Boots scraping against pavement, the sun glaring off her name patch, the camera phone following her every move. In that moment, Brenda wasn't a soldier. She was a target. Not for what she did, but for who she was. Naomi Harris had just wanted to grab a soda and a bag of chips before her shift at the bookstore. She was running a few minutes behind schedule, but something made her slow down as she turned into the gas station lot. Maybe it was the second police cruiser pulling up too fast. Maybe it was the way the white cashier glanced out the window and started nodding toward the woman in uniform. She pulled into the farthest parking spot and sat for a moment. Her camera app was already open. She didn't know the woman's name yet, but something about the stance, the way she stood tall, like she'd been here before, told Naomi everything. This wasn't going to be a misunderstanding cleared up with a nod and a "thank you for your service." Naomi stepped out of her car, phone held low but already recording. She crossed slowly toward the entrance, staying outside, watching the moment the officer took the woman's arms and twisted them behind her back. The woman didn't struggle. Her head turned slightly, her jaw set. Naomi caught her expression. It wasn't fear. It was disappointment. The older cop said something Naomi couldn't hear. The younger one looked uneasy, shifting from foot to foot like he didn't want to be there. But he wasn't stopping it either. Naomi walked a little closer. "Excuse me," she said, her voice just loud enough to carry. "What's the charge?" The officer turned. "The older one." "Huh?" He didn't answer. "Is she being arrested?" Naomi asked again, louder this time. "She's being detained for questioning," the officer replied. "We've had reports of impersonation." Naomi raised her phone higher now, making sure the camera caught everything. "Even after she showed you her military ID?" He glared at her. "Please step back, ma'am." The woman, Brenda, was guided roughly toward the cruiser. Naomi followed behind, recording it all. A few other customers had stepped outside now, murmuring. Phones were being raised. The cashier peeked out, pale and quiet. Brenda was placed in the back of the car, hands still cuffed behind her. Naomi kept filming. "That woman is in uniform. That's a real ID she showed you. This is harassment, and we all see it." The younger officer turned his head slightly, eyes flickering toward her phone. "Ma'am, we're verifying her identity. We'll have this cleared up soon." "Then why is she in handcuffs?" No answer. Inside the car, Brenda sat upright. Her eyes scanned the growing crowd. Her mouth didn't move, but her expression said everything. She'd been through worse. But it shouldn't take worse for people to care. The older officer barked something into his radio. The younger one hovered by the cruiser. A second passed. Then Brenda leaned her head back, closed her eyes, and slowly exhaled. One breath. Just one. Naomi watched her. Then, without a word, she stepped off to the side, pulled up her contacts and hit record again. This time on another app. This is Naomi Harris, recording live outside the Speedway gas station on Oakland and 8th. A black woman in full military uniform has just been handcuffed by 2 officers. She showed her military ID. She did nothing wrong. This is what racial profiling looks like. She posted it. She tagged every news station she could think of. The clip of Brenda being led in cuffs, still silent, still composed, was already spreading. Inside the car, Brendan wasn't watching the chaos unfold. She wasn't even listening to the officers. She was counting seconds. It took 13 seconds before her mind began drafting the call she would make. When the door finally opened and the older officer leaned in, she didn't move. "You want to tell me who you really are?" he asked, voice sharp. "I already did," she replied. twice. The younger officer stood behind him, shifting awkwardly. "Ma'am," he started. "Sergeant," she corrected. The older cop scoffed. "You can call yourself whatever you want." Brenda smiled. Just a flicker. "You really want to find out who I am?" There was a long pause. "Make the call," she said. "It's in the breast pocket of my jacket. Military-issue phone. Speed dial 2. The older officer didn't budge, but the younger one blinked and tried to recreate it, so we hoped he could repeat it. "Sir, maybe we should just check. It'll take 2 seconds." "Do it," Brenda said quietly, eyes on him. With a reluctant nod from his partner, the younger cop reached into her jacket, found the phone, saw the military-issued ID again tucked behind the screen. He hit speed dial 2. It rang once. Then came the voice, crisp, deep, commanding. "This is Colonel Darren Mitchell. Who am I speaking with?" The young officer straightened like a child caught skipping school. "This is Officer Kevin Dorsey with the Hadleyville PD. We have someone in custody who said to call you." There was a pause, then the tone shifted. "You have Sergeant Brenda Ford in custody." The voice now cut like a blade. "Yes, sir. There was a report." "You're making a very large mistake, Officer Dorsey. You need to uncuff her, now." The older officer, watching, paled. "Who is it?" Kevin turned, voice tight. "Colonel, U.S. Army." Brenda's eyes stayed closed, but her mouth curled into something just shy of a smirk. Colonel Mitchell's voice returned. "Put her on the phone." Kevin handed it over. Brenda took the phone calmly, wrists still locked behind her. "Sir." "Brenda, you okay?" "I'm fine. They're confused." His voice softened, but only for a breath. "They won't be for long. Sit tight." The call ended. Officer Dorsey started fumbling with the cuffs. "We're going to go ahead and let you go now." Brenda didn't flinch. "Don't do me any favors." The cuffs clicked open. Brenda stepped out, rolling her shoulders like she was shedding more than metal. Outside, the crowd had grown. Naomi was still filming. Someone had already pulled up her live stream on their phone and showed it to the older officer, whose jaw clenched tighter by the second. Brenda stood in the open now, a free woman, though she had never stopped being one. She looked at the crowd, then at Naomi. "Thank you," she said, quiet but firm. Naomi nodded. "We've got you." Brenda didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her presence was the story. Officer Malloy, whose nameplate now gleamed under the sunlight, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, this was a misunderstanding." Brenda turned her head slowly. "No, Officer Malloy. This was procedure. Your kind." She didn't wait for a reply. She walked back toward the station doors, not to go in, not to buy anything, but to show that she wasn't leaving until she was ready. The people around her parted like water. Naomi followed behind, recording every second. And across the internet, the story had already started to move. Colonel Darren Mitchell was already on the tarmac when the video hit his desk. Not a link, not a headline, a direct, unedited clip sent from a contact inside the Department of Defense's Civil Affairs Division. His boots were still wet from the rain in Jacksonville, and the smell of jet fuel lingered on his uniform as he opened the file on his tablet. It started with a blurry frame, someone's shaky hand capturing a gas station, 2 patrol cars, and a black woman in uniform being led away in handcuffs. The resolution sharpened just enough to show the name. Ford. Her posture didn't waver. Even as the cuffs clicked shut behind her back, she didn't flinch. Mitchell paused the video, took a slow breath, then hit dial on his encrypted line. "General Langston," he said as soon as the call picked up, "we've got a problem in Hadleyville." Meanwhile, in Hadleyville, the phones wouldn't stop ringing. The police department lobby was flooded with camera crews, furious citizens, and silence from the brass. No statement, no explanation, no apology. Officer Kevin Dorsey sat at his desk, his palms slick against the wood, staring at the report he couldn't seem to finish writing. His partner, Brent Malloy, had been in the chief's office for over 20 minutes now. That never meant anything good. Dorsey had been on the force just under a year, rookie enough to still feel the weight of the badge, long enough to recognize when things were about to blow up. He'd rewatched the body cam footage twice. Brenda Ford had followed every instruction, calm, direct, compliant. She even gave them 2 forms of ID without hesitation, everything they were taught to look for in a cooperative subject. But instead of backing down, Brent had pushed harder. Dorsey rubbed his eyes. The back of his mind buzzed with the colonel's voice from that call. The kind of voice that doesn't yell to be heard, just commands. The kind of voice that makes you wonder how badly you just messed up your life. Across town, Brenda stood in her mother's living room, out of uniform now, her sleeves rolled to the elbows. Her mother, Judith, paced behind her, cell phone in one hand and a Bible in the other. "You want me to go down there?" Judith asked for the 3rd time. "'Cause I will." Brenda didn't answer. She was focused on her laptop. Emails were flooding in. Some from former soldiers she hadn't heard from in years. Others from strangers who saw the video and wanted to say they were sorry, or angry, or inspired. And then there were the others, the threats. The racial slurs in her inbox came just as fast as the offers to speak at rallies, to be the face of a cause. Brenda closed the laptop. "Don't go online," she muttered, more to herself than to her mother. "I already told every cousin we got to stay out the commons," Judith said. "People act brave when they behind a keyboard, but they don't know you, don't know what you've given up, what you've survived." "I don't want to be a symbol," Brenda said, her voice low. "Well, baby," her mother said gently, "you don't get to choose that part." There was a knock at the door. Brenda stood, stiffening. Her hand instinctively reached toward her waist before remembering she wasn't on base. She opened the door slowly. Colonel Darren Mitchell stood on the porch, rain still dripping from his cap. He looked taller than usual, more tired, too. "Sergeant Ford," he said, his voice steady. "May I come in?" She stepped aside without a word. Judith raised an eyebrow. "You're the one who made that call, aren't you?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied. She nodded, almost approving. "Then I'll make some tea." The 2 soldiers sat across from each other in silence for a moment. Mitchell finally spoke. "We've already opened a formal investigation. Civil Rights Division is involved. Military liaison, too." Brenda nodded. Mitchell leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "There's going to be pressure, from all sides. They're going to want you to speak publicly." "I'm not ready." "You don't have to be, but they'll push anyway." She met his eyes. "Sir, what happens to those officers?" Mitchell exhaled. "Depends. The younger one, he's rattled, scared, but I don't think he's dirty. The other one? He's what the system protects." Brenda looked down. "So nothing happens?" "Oh, something's gonna happen," he said, voice cool. "They're hoping to keep it quiet. Internal reprimand, maybe shuffle one of them to another department, but the public's already lit the match." Brenda stood and walked to the window, arms crossed. Outside, a local news van had parked across the street. "I've spent my life fighting for this country," she said. "Worn this uniform so long it's part of my skin. And still, one small-town cop decides I don't belong?" Mitchell watched her carefully. "That's exactly why your voice matters now." She didn't respond. Later that night, Officer Brent Malloy stood alone in the locker room, his back to the door. The lights flickered slightly, and the old AC unit clanked in the wall. His badge sat on the bench beside him. His phone buzzed again and again. Texts from unknown numbers. some cheering him on, others threatening his life. He picked up his badge and stared at it, not with pride, but with confusion. In another room, Chief Renner poured a stiff drink and stared at a press release draft he wasn't sure he'd ever send. "The Hadleyville Police Department deeply regrets—" He deleted the sentence. Started again. Across town, Naomi was uploading her next clip. This one wasn't a recording, it was a message. To anyone watching this who thinks this was just about one bad cop, think again. Sergeant Brenda Ford didn't ask to be handcuffed. She didn't ask to be made into a headline. But now that she is, maybe it's time we ask why it takes a uniform for a black woman to be believed. She hit post. Brenda sat in the quiet after her mother had gone to bed, her phone buzzing beside her. This wasn't the life she'd asked for, but maybe it was the one she was built for. Brenda stood behind the curtain, just out of sight, hands clasped tightly in front of her. The roar of the crowd beyond the stage was steady, calm but energized. It had been 3 weeks since the video, since the cuffs, since the quiet humiliation that now played on every major network as a symbol of what still hadn't changed. But something had changed. That much was certain. She hadn't planned to speak today. She'd said no to 5 interviews, ignored requests from late-night hosts and news anchors who wanted her to cry on camera or throw out a soundbite they could spin. She wasn't a viral moment. She was a woman who had been disrespected in her own uniform by men who saw skin before service. That kind of wound didn't heal in a week. But this stage, this moment, this wasn't about her, not just her. It was about all the women and men who looked like her and wore their country's flag, only to be treated like strangers in the nation they defended. Colonel Mitchell stood beside her, nodding once before stepping away to let her have her space. From the podium, Naomi finished her speech, her voice steady despite the emotion running under each word. And that's why we're here today. Not because we're angry, though we are, not because we're surprised, because sadly we're not. We're here because people like Sergeant Brenda Ford deserve better than to be questioned for wearing the uniform they earned. The crowd rose to their feet before Naomi even finished the sentence. Brenda closed her eyes. One breath. Just one. When she stepped onto the stage, the applause didn't fade. It built. Stronger. Louder. She walked with that same quiet, controlled strength, even as the emotions pushed against her ribs like a rising tide. She stood at the microphone and waited. The crowd slowly settled. "I didn't want to speak today," she began. "I wanted to stay quiet. I thought maybe if I stayed quiet, the noise would pass. Maybe if I didn't say anything, this would just be another bad day I could pack away like the rest. But something happened when I was handcuffed in that parking lot." She paused. Not for drama, for control. I didn't feel afraid. I felt tired, because I'd done everything right. I followed orders, I served overseas, I paid taxes, I held doors open. I smiled when I didn't feel like smiling. I wore a uniform that said U.S. Army because I believed in something bigger than myself. And still, it wasn't enough. There was a murmur through the crowd. People nodded. A few cried. "But you know what made that day different?" Brenda asked, voice growing clearer. "You, a girl with a phone, a voice that wouldn't back down, a crowd that said we saw it too, and a country that for once looked back." She lifted her eyes. "I didn't get justice because I wore a uniform. I got justice because people chose not to look away. The silence that followed was heavy, not hollow. It was the kind that meant people were listening." Later, as the crowd dispersed, Brenda stayed behind the stage, sitting on the edge, her boots dangling over the steps. Naomi sat beside her, pulling her curls back with a hair tie. "You killed it," Naomi said softly. Brenda smiled. "Didn't think I had it in me." Oh, you did. They just hadn't seen it yet. A car pulled up near the security barrier. Officer Kevin Dorsey stepped out, still in uniform, though now without the weight of pride on his shoulders. Brenda watched him approach, but didn't stand. "Sergeant Ford," he said, his tone unsure. Brenda gave him a nod. "Officer Dorsey, I came to say, I'm sorry." She didn't answer right away. "I didn't stop him," he said, his voice low. "I should have. I froze, and I followed. And I've been thinking about that every day since." "You weren't the first," Brenda said. "But you don't have to be like the rest." Dorsey looked down, nodded once, and left the way he came. Behind them, a few reporters snapped photos, but none approached. Not today. Not now. Across the city, at the Hadleyville Police Department, a press release was finally issued. Brent Malloy was suspended indefinitely, pending review and misconduct hearings. His name was plastered across news segments for days, but his face never showed up on the force again. Kevin Dorsey took a temporary leave. When he returned, he requested to be reassigned to community outreach. No press release covered that, what Brenda noticed. Brenda's inbox no longer overflowed with hate. The threats slowed. The letters came in instead, handwritten ones, from black soldiers in Texas, from elderly veterans in Chicago, from young girls who saw themselves in her for the first time. Judith watched her daughter from the living room, arms folded across her chest, head shaking with quiet pride. "I raised a good one," she said to nobody in particular. Colonel Mitchell sent an official commendation through the Army chain of command, not for valor in combat, but for unwavering professionalism, grace, and moral fortitude during a civil encounter under public scrutiny. He made sure the wording was tight. He knew what language the higher-ups listened to. Months passed. Brenda returned to base, back in her element, training the next wave of reservists. They looked at her with a kind of respect that didn't need to be spoken, the kind that comes from watching someone walk through fire without burning. She didn't let it change her. Not really. She still drank her coffee black. Still laced her boots tight enough to leave lines on her socks. Still jogged at 6 a.m. sharp every Sunday like the world might fall apart if she didn't. But when she stood at the head of a formation now, when she looked those recruits in the eyes, she made sure they knew this. "It's not enough to wear the uniform," she told them one morning, voice firm as her boots hit gravel. "You've got to carry the weight of what it means. You've got to remember who's watching, and who gets questioned just for being here." They didn't speak. They just nodded. And somewhere deep inside her, Brenda Ford allowed herself the one thing she hadn't given herself since the day in that parking lot. She exhaled. Not because it was over, but because finally it had begun.